and welcome to the Neurodiverse Museum in Conversations. And today we're in conversation with Dr. Gill-Loomes-Quinn, and I am so delighted to be having a conversation with you today. Hi, Jill.
Hey.
Hey, so we are really delighted to be able to bring these in conversations to you because of some funding from the Art Fund. And yeah, over the course of the next sort of 20-25 minutes, we'll be talking about loads of really fascinating things that are so relevant to the museum sector. So stay tuned for lots of interesting information as well as what this can do to help you in terms of your practice. So Jill, to start off with, I wondered if you could just introduce yourself and a bit more about what you do. And yeah.
Yeah, so I've been working in the field of autism advocacy kind of broadly for about the last sort of 20 years. That's included traditional kind of one-to-one sort of caseload advocacy, but also other things like report writing and interviews and teaching and things like that. I also have a background in teaching, particularly adults with various learning differences, including autism. And yeah, my PhD is in mental capacity law, which is a similar area, but also different. So that's kind of expanded me in a different direction as well. But yeah, as far as autism goes, advocacy is my passion, really.
I mean, it's amazing. And crikey, yeah, your PhD, that's fascinating on its own to think about where things fit for autistic people, neurodivergent people in terms of capacity as well. So, oh yeah, another time I should talk to you more about that as well, because that's really interesting and relevant to some of the things that I think about. So I wanted to ask you about services for neurodivergent people and autistic people more specifically as well. But do you feel that they are equitable for neurodivergent people? Or do you think and feel that things are really, really kind of skewed towards what neurotypical people are looking for and want?
I think by definition, things are the world in which we live in which we live as a whole is geared towards the majority, so geared towards the typical. And I think the cultural sector, museum sector is no different. I think things are changing, have been changing. In the time that I've been sort of working around autism, and the time that I've been a disabled adult, I've seen things changing. Nowhere near as quickly as we would like, I don't think. And sometimes I think that's a resource issue for sure. And obviously we know that we're all living in straitened times, and in some ways, in terms of funding and resources, things have gone backwards in the time that I've been around. But not everything has to cost money. And sometimes I think there's a kind of a misunderstanding that that everything takes resources, and that everything needs money, and that if we're gonna try and make changes, we need to have expensive consultations and hire the best sort of consultants and that kind of thing. When really there's an awful lot that we can all do that doesn't necessarily cost any money, and actually, particularly in the area of neurodivergent adjustments for neurodivergent people, the kinds of adaptations and adjustments that a lot of us advocate for are things that actually improve the sector and the experience for everybody. They're not just it's not something that's unique to. It might be something that is essential for a neurodivergent person, but for a typical person as well, that a lot of the adaptations are going to make a difference and improve experience for them too.
Oh, totally. I mean, that kind of, we talk about anticipatory adjustments, don't we? Making sure that they're in place. And I think sometimes, like you say, people think that's going to be really expensive and we can't afford a gallery refurb or something like that, when actually it can be, maybe a gallery walkthrough on a mobile phone that you put on your website beforehand, that someone goes, oh,
Yeah.
okay, that's what's going to happen. And you're right.
Yeah.
For a neurodivergent person, that might make the difference between them walking through the door, but anybody is going to find
Yeah.
that
I mean,
useful.
you talk about the walkthrough, and that's kind of that's a perfect kind of example for me, because it makes me think to when I was doing my PhD viva, which is obviously didn't take place in a museum or anything like that, but it was in a part of the department that I wasn't familiar with, and for my viva, I had there was a chair who was separate from the actual examiners, but you know was kind of chairing proceedings. And one of the things he did in advance was do just a walkthrough with his phone camera of the room, and the route into the room, and the place where I'd wait, and the route from the area where I'd wait to the room itself and things. And I think it's hard for other people to make sense of what a huge difference that is. It's not just, it doesn't just improve the experience itself, but it improves the period of anticipation, because often I think for a lot of people, particularly, I'd say definitely for myself, the thing that makes the part of the experience that make things inaccessible isn't necessarily just the time when we're in the place. A lot of the time it's anticipatory. It's if we struggle to visualize things in our minds, then we maybe don't have an idea of what to expect in the place we're going to, and they'll just be kind of like a big kind of black hole that it's like an empty kind of space that creates anxiety. Or there's all kinds of like for a lot of us, we'll kind of we'll think about, oh, what if, and we're not necessarily as we don't necessarily find it as easy as typical people do to kind of to sort of like weigh what risks are and things. So it's like, what if this happens? And it might be really unlikely, but to us it might still happen. And so having like a visual picture in your mind beforehand enables you to kind of keep those kind of what ifs and the big black hole kind of at bay, and means that you're more likely to actually get to the venue, and then to sort of be able to access it, which often is kind of not the most difficult part, or sometimes isn't. And yeah, it doesn't need to be anything fancy. It doesn't need to be like a super high quality video with like great great graphics and everything. It can be a person on their phone, like with a phone camera or something. And also, I think as well as it being materially useful, to me, I would say that it gives a clear message that the place is concerned about people like me being there. It kind of gives me the impression that I'm part of who they envisage when they think of their guests. And that's something that in itself I find particularly kind of improves the kind of the equity of the experience. I mean, the whole, if I were going to have to sum up why I think this is kind of important, I mean, of course, it's about equity and those principles as well, but it's even wider than that, because the museum sector is part of our kind of cultural fabric, our society. it's where we kind of put together what we deem to be important, and where we sort of tell the story, create the narrative of like who we are as a species, and as as a society. And if we care about kind of democracy and about all being not only represented but also informed about our culture and our society and all those things, then we need to have a place there as well. And so that feeling as though I'm included, I'm not kind of like an afterthought. It's practically relevant, but also, um, yeah, it's all the
I
good
think that
stuff as
makes,
well.
yeah, I think it makes absolute sense, because sometimes it can feel like it's tokenistic. It can feel like it's, oh, we need to do this, rather than we want to do it. And we understand how to do that because we've included and spoken to neurodivergent adults, disabled adults, to understand what that process might look like. And we've thought about it in different ways. That, I mean, we can do things even if we can't do everything. That might be really expensive, or we've got the capacity all the time, but at least we've thought about it, and made you feel like this is something that's relevant to you. And you're right, the anxiety that exists almost at the minute of certain things, when you haven't got that ability to visualize it or think it through or understand what's going to happen, often will prevent actually being able to take part. And when you're thinking about workforce as well, and sometimes people will say, well, we can't give the questions in advance, but it's like, well, why? And also, if you really feel that strongly about it, just give them to everybody.
Yeah.
But that will make such a difference to someone feeling like, okay, I'm ready. I know what's coming when I go into.
Yeah, and I have, I've known employers that have changed their recruitment practice across the board, to
Yeah,
kind of give questions in advance and things, and really sort of challenge the idea that we as kind of as interview candidates are going to give of our best when we're on
yeah,
the spot. That's in many instances, depending on what the job is that you're going for. Um, what you come up with on the spot while in a state of extreme anxiety isn't necessarily what you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis anyway. So
totally.
yeah, sure, giving people the chance to think is kind of um, it's kind of raising the standards across the board. Um,
Exactly. And it's challenging the narrative as well around what it is to be neurodivergent and what it is to have that kind of recruitment process. I've spoken to some people who go, well, we've just always done it like that. I'm like, well, you're missing out on so many people who would massively improve your organization's resilience and your ability to attract new and different audiences. And you're missing out on that. So it's not just them that's missing that opportunity, you're missing it as well. So it's trying to get people to understand that. And I was just thinking when you were saying about those anticipatory things beforehand, and that recognition that a lot of people who work in the museum sector often don't know that they're neurodivergent, that privilege of diagnosis and understanding. So if you've got those anticipatory adjustments in place, someone may not know they need them, but it will make the difference for them to be able to take part or have an equitable experience. So yeah, I mean, I'm with you with all of that. So I suppose we've touched on it a little bit already, but I wanted to ask you what you think we can do to change this. What if someone's working in a museum and they're thinking, well, I really want to do better, I really want to understand more. What can they do? What do you think they should, how should they start?
So I think the first step would be to connect with some autistic people, and depending on the size of the organization itself, that might look like asking for staff input. Some larger organizations have kind of disabled staff networks and things, which might be a starting point. But also most kind of towns and cities will have kind of peer support groups or networks or hubs for for autistic adults in the area, and often a lot of the work that those people are keen to participate in is precisely the kind of consultation, the kind of the kind of explaining what they would like, how they would feel represented, how to make somewhere accessible, that kind of thing. And it's even better if it's an organization where you can actually maybe in some way kind of repay them for their time in some way. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I think that needs to be the starting point, because I think what I have the ongoing thing that I find, so as well as being autistic, I'm also a wheelchair user, and so access and accessibility and the opposite of that, exclusion, are obviously things that I sort of I have to address on a day-to-day basis. And the thing is that I find that people by and large don't know what they don't know. And in some ways, actually, I think the fact that we have now legislation that is supposed to guarantee access and adjustments, and the way that's kind of permeated into society's consciousness, in some ways has kind of it's created a kind of false sense of security among your average person, that they think that the world is all accessible now because it has to be, because the law says it does. And often they won't kind of know, they won't know what's involved. And sometimes that can include when you have actually set up a system, or like you've bought into a scheme or something that's based around accessibility, because sometimes one of the things that I think is particularly problematic is when someone might have set up, say, like a scheme. I mean, a good example would be if you're a person who needs to have a carer come with you when you go somewhere, and different organisations deal with that in different ways, but sometimes organisations require that you bring different forms of kind of evidence that you need a carer, and they'll say things like, it's either going to be like your PIP report, which involves trailing around an awful lot of very personal and financial information with you that nobody else out there in the street would expect to have to show just to get into a museum. Or it might be get a letter from your GP. But a lot of us who are disabled, we don't routinely, it's part of the medicalization of disability in a way, but a lot of us don't see a GP from one year into the next about our impairment, particularly if it's neurodivergence, because that's not the GP's main area of interest by and large. So that's not, they're not the specialists that we might go to. And so if we do have to then go and get a letter from our GP, not only are GPs super overworked these days, there's difficulty getting an appointment. Sometimes there's a cost involved, but also particularly in the case of neurodivergent people, those are all the kind of barriers that often stop us from accessing things in the first place, because admin doesn't tend to be our friend. Filling in forms, speaking to people, phone calls. There's research now precisely about how using the phone, for example, is a massive, massive barrier to a lot of autistic people. I thought for years and years that it was just me. But it turns out it's not. But there's all these things, and so that's just an example of where, with the best will in the world, people, through not thinking through what the access arrangements that they've put in place actually involve and what they look like in the lives of every disabled person, through not thinking that through, they're actually putting more barriers in the way. And personally, I find it more soul destroying when, access is just within reach, but then the very thing that's meant to be helping um, is the thing that's stopping me. And that's before we get to the kind of the message it sends,
Yeah.
as though I'd be so desperate to, smuggle my carer in with me free of charge that
Exactly.
I'd pretend that I needed it. It just, yeah,
Yeah.
compare and contrast with what I said before about how access arrangements can make you feel welcome and represented and included. They can also do just the opposite.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was my long way of explaining why I would say it's so important to connect with the people who you're trying to make arrangements for, to really get a sense of what those arrangements are going to look like for those people themselves.
Oh, I think, I mean, so much of what you said there resonated with me in terms of my personal experience of all the hideous admin and stuff. It took me 3 years to write my own forms for my own diagnosis. Just to even write
Yeah.
the forms. So it's like you've got the process that's in place that's meant to support and help people. It's just,
Mm.
and absolutely, if museums are doing that or they're putting those things in place, it's just automatically making people think, well, you just clearly don't want me, and it's too hard.
Yeah.
It's too hard to do it.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying there in terms of how museums can adjust and adapt and think about what they're doing, I think, it's a perfect way to end our conversation, really, to say that that's, reach out, talk to people, involve them, help them
Mm.
to understand what you're doing.
And also, I mean, it's such a cliche to talk about, if you aim for the stars, then you might reach the moon. I mean, it is a cliche, but probably for a reason. And I
Mm.
think, particularly for the museum sector, thinking about places, that are local to me where I might go and things, a lot of the time the buildings that they're in are, they're listed or they're old, or they're not exactly sort of, you know grade A, kind of accessible kind of, so a lot of the time museums are starting from a difficult place, and so it might not be possible to get to kind of like the gold standard, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't
Yeah,
try and do something.
totally.
There's a museum that's near me, just as one example of that before we finish, where um, their first floor isn't accessible and there's no lift, and it just doesn't seem to be possible. Um, and it's not the best, but what they do have is they have like they've made like a catalogue of the sort of the exhibits and things that are upstairs, so that you can at least look through that and talk with the staff and the curators and things about what is up
Mm.
there and things. So it's it's far from ideal, but at least they've done something, and it's better than nothing.
They've considered, haven't they? They've thought, okay, well,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can't do anything about that, but what can we do that gives some kind of experience of it? Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Jill. It's been really good chatting with you, and so many things that you've said, yeah, totally resonate with me, and hopefully with people who are trying to think, how can we change what we're doing in our museum, and how can we shift what the sector does for neurodivergent people? Hopefully this has been really helpful. So I'm going to
Good.
put up our end screen and say a big thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Thanks, Jill.